Good afternoon and happy emancipation. Thank you for tuning in today to the University of Trinidad and Tobago's webinar and celebration of emancipation this year, Writing Connections, African Retention, in Trinbago literature. Please join me in welcoming the university president, Professor Prakash Prasad, who will open the session with a few remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Francis. It's my distinct pleasure to be here to join such a distinguished collection of artists. I really am, honored. And I want to say to each and every one of you a most warm welcome on this really warm, Monday evening on the occasion of Emancipation Day. Now, this is the second time that we are celebrating emancipation virtually, but be that as it may, I think it is important that we do so. And I think this way the message also gets out maybe to a different audience, so more and to probably more people, but we at UTT feel it important to do so. So again, let me emphasize that we are really happy to have you all and more than happy and honored to host this occasion with such distinguished personalities as Mr. Earl Lovelace, Zahra Gordon, the Freetown Collective represented by Mohammed, Norbese Philip, and moderated by Dr. Kayla Francis, our own. Mr. Lovelace actually is a master artist in residence at UTT, in addition to his other distinguished sort of endeavors. Now, it's Emancipation Day, as we know, celebrates when the occasion for the sort of stopping, in other words, of slavery, to use that word loosely. What I wanted to point out, and do so gingerly and with respect, is that we have to look at this in a context. Life is a continuum. The past, the present, and the future. They're all linked. It's a continuum. So I know that that artists and writers have a very sensitive and an important role to play in highlighting certain aspects as they see. As we go about life, we don't always see things as they should be. And writers and song poets, etc., give us a good view, a special lens to see some of the things that we need to look at or to reflect on. And that is critical for society. I think particularly in the Caribbean area, where we have this plurality of cultures. I wanted to point out that maybe, like I say, from a point of view of an engineer, that we look at things in this way, that yes, you write on the past, you write on the present, but maybe, and I am making, like I said, a very gentle suggestion, that in some of the writings and songs, etc., in poetry, maybe we can look at the future, not as fiction, but as extrapolation. And I couch it in the context that we are looking at the reparations. And today I understand that Professor Beckers is on BBC on Hard Talk, talking about reparations, which is absolutely necessary for us. But I think from reparations, and it's going to come, we need to go to preparations. What do we do as we go forward? So I think this is something, reparations to preparations. As I talk about the continuum, this is something that we need to look at, that we need to go forward. So we must correct the past, but we must also prepare for the future. And in this light, some of the songs and poetry and writings, books that you do, I'm again respectfully and gently suggesting that some aspect of it should look at this. How do we go forward? How do we see ourselves? And it's not fiction, like I say, it is extrapolation. It's putting something, a vision, that as we go forward. And I think you all are uniquely placed to do that, uniquely placed. So I would suggest again that this is something we need to consider. And in closing, I want to thank you all sincerely and ask, for my own self and from UTT's behalf to please continue this work that you're doing. It is essential for us as a society to have this written part, the songs, etc., as we go forward. So again, I want to thank you, right? And I'm sure that this webinar is going to achieve the purpose is set out to achieve. Again, thank you and good afternoon.
Well, thank you very much. Mhm.
Thank you, President.
Thank you.
The title is Writing Connections, African Retentions in Trinbago Literature. And just so that we all know where we're starting from, the idea of playing with the word writing, spelling it RITE-ING, is both to highlight that we're talking about literature, but also in the act of remembering our linkages. It is more than just entertainment, it's more than just storytelling. There's a metaphysical purpose behind it. And with me today, as the president said, I have a range and 5 exemplary artists who recreate this right in their writing. We are joined today by Mr. Earl Lovelace, renowned novelist, playwright, journalist, essayist, cricketer, so some might not know that, and at one point, an aspiring Calypsonian. Ms. Norbesi Philip, poet, playwright, novelist, independent scholar, lawyer, originally from Tobago. And I have to say congratulations on winning, and let me get this right, the World Literature Today African Retentions in Trinbagonian Culture. What that sudden moment that made it very visceral, very real, that you suddenly went like, oh my goodness, this is what we do. Throwing it out.
Is anybody answering?
Yes, anybody.
I wouldn't speak before the elders, so either one.
Same
Unless they
here.
give permission for us to speak.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Lovelace. The last time I saw you, Earl, was in Tobago when we were receiving an honor. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Right. I mean, what was my aha moment? I don't know that I had an aha moment as a single moment. I think it goes right back to my childhood, actually. When I was a little fella, I read a lot. And one of the things that I read about was the people who were supposed to be slaves. But I knew my grandfather, who was a Black man, knew my grandmother, who was also a Black woman. And the notion of them being slaves was not one that fitted the vision I had of them. And so from that moment, I began to look to see who are these slaves. And then I discovered that people who were enslaved were resisting. The people were resisting. And I talked about slave resistance and slave rebellions. But slaves don't resist and rebel. Slave is a condition that you accept. But Africans here never accepted that condition. And so that has been my struggle, if you want. So that has been my aha moment, and also helped to determine the space from which to engage being African in the Caribbean.
I'll go after Earl. Like you, Earl, I don't think I have an aha moment, but when I looked at the questions Kayla had sent, I recalled in Tobago, so this is going back at least 60 years, we lived in Rockley Vale, Scarborough, and 2 Coptic priests were visiting and staying in our home, 2 Coptic priests from Ethiopia. Now, at the time, I didn't know anything about it. I remember they wore these long black robes, they had these long curls. And in fact, one of them wanted my mother to promise my older sister to him in marriage. So it's only years later that I began to put it together that it was part of that movement with Garvey and connections with the Coptic Church. The other moment is the Calypso Congo Man. So by this time now, I've moved to Trinidad. We moved, the whole family moved. And I remember that Calypso, and adults, I was about 13, adults would laugh at it because it was very salacious. But there was something about this Congo man and him singing about Africa. And what was that all about? And, you know, all the tropes later on, I look back about cannibalism, but he was saying something else. because at the time the Congo crisis was going on and so on. So I would say that would be the other sort of moment, if you want to say. And then just the language on the street when we moved to Trinidad, just hearing the way people spoke and so on, it was very kinetic and energetic. So yeah, those would be my two moments. And I think that going to tranquility, and Earl talked about this idea of slaves and slavery, and we were singing Britons never, never, never shall be slaves. I was about 8. And I just knew in my little body that something didn't make sense with that. And again, many years later, I go back to that moment to realize what it was I was feeling. So I think we pick up this legacy of resistance very, very early on. A teacher at Bishop's telling us, looking at us and saying, everybody else has a history except for you people. Remember that very clearly, very, very clearly. So those are some of the, the sort of points that sort of have come together for me in the work that I do.
Right. And actually, so in a sense, I don't know that we're dealing necessarily with African retentions as much as with Africa's presence. We don't have anything to retain. We are here, and we have been here for 400 years, and we have done a whole number of things which a lot of us have not acknowledged. And this is part of our presentation for the movement. This is what we are engaged in at the moment. It's not so much in recalling something that existed and makes us feel good, but dealing with our presence and our presentness.
Thank you.
Don't, Zara and Mohammed, don't be afraid. Come on, jump in.
I think I relate to what both the elders have said, because when I thought about this question as well, it did start with my childhood and with me remembering all the influences that I had from playing mass at a young age, from being involved in Carnival, from going to Calypso competitions and other things that were cultural, never explicitly called African necessarily, but just always there and always part of my upbringing. And I don't think, when I was thinking about this, I don't think it was until I got to university that I actually had a language for it. I guess more of an academic language for it. I remember, something that I remember as I was thinking about this is looking at the film Sankofa by Haile Gerima. And at the beginning, there is a man covered in clay or mud and beating drums. And I remember seeing that video in my early 20s and saying, well, oh, this is Juve. And it was something that, that's the first thing that I connected with in seeing the film. And it just, heightened my consciousness of, how, as the elder just said, how present we are and how much we've retained, really. So that's something that I thought about with it, definitely.
My beginnings are a little different. I was born into a very militant Islamic community, and it was a group of Black men and women who, seeing the East Indian version of Islam and being kind of racially profiled by the East Indian community, they wanted to show that their Islam was just as strong as everybody else. And so what they did is they took a very Arab approach to their Islam, so much so that they excluded their own Africanness. And my father was someone who, he wasn't about that. So he brought drums into the community, and it was this big debate for years as to whether the drums were haram or they halal. Every Eid, he would bring out the drums and we would play these drums. And all these little children who don't know nothing about Islam or Arabs or nothing, but they're African, they come out and they're dancing. And it's to see some of their parents coming and the little girls whining and jumping all over the place, not knowing anything of the world or what they should do or shouldn't do or how they should praise God or not praise God. And to see their mothers who have covered themselves and have bought this version of religion, trying to hold them back. And these same children running out of their arms, And I remember just looking at this from a very young age and saying, there's something here. I don't know what it is, but clearly something is here. And it's very real and it's very present. And And I kind of always come back to those moments of my, without knowing anything about it, yearning to be close to the drums, to play drums, to dance, always. And that was before I knew anything. I didn't know nothing about Marcus Garvey, Haile Selassie, nothing. I knew nothing. But I knew what I felt at that time. And as I get older and I look back at it, I understand it a bit more. So I can't really say I had an aha moment in terms of that, but that was the first moment of a strong feeling of a thing that I didn't have any control of, but was embedded in me.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of start with that question because for a lot of Africans living outside of Africa, and I'm not just going to limit it to Trinidad, they don't have that recognition. And for some of us, it comes at a very specific moment. Like for me, I mean, I was aware it was an intellectual understanding of my Africanness. I was aware of it. You can't go to Howard and not be, kind of groomed in that way. But it was not until I did my first emancipation walk in 2009, we reached Frederick Street, and I look across and I see this woman in this mint gown and a burgundy gilly. I was like, where am I? Because I was in Lagos, I was in Accra, I was in Johannesburg, I was everywhere all at once. And after reading Soyinka and, these different African texts, it became very, very visceral, just beyond knowing to feeling it. And it's always interesting to hear the journey people in the Caribbean, especially, because we are still in a phase where we don't want to talk about, if we say it's African, it's suddenly not Trinidadian. So it's very interesting to track that consciousness and how it grows. And maybe because like your community, Muhammad, I'm a bit militant and I'm looking for ways to spread that recognition. So I was looking for inspiration for how that recognition might be spread. But I don't want to harp on the negativity. I want today to really be celebration and celebratory, because we are here. There is a presence. We are present. The Middle Passage didn't kill culture. It came tucked in our bellies and our hearts and our minds and got recreated and reestablished here. And I love celebrating that idea. So in keeping with that, I want to move on to the next question. What inspires you to include, to highlight that presence, that present in your work?
Well, for me, it has been kind of a requirement, because in Trinidad, people have felt that, as you just said a while ago, to talk about Africa is a little bit of a problem. You feel self-conscious, you feel as if you're doing something wrong, you feel as if you shouldn't be mentioning this, and yet we can't go anywhere unless we mention this. I don't think we can go anywhere unless we root it in understanding what has happened to us and what we expect of the society. This is a society in which people have been living close to each other, and we talk about all of we is one. Yet when you hear about crime and problems, they are located in very specific communities, or we locate them there, and nobody comes and says, let us lend a hand now. So we have a lot to talk about, and perhaps some of it will be not negative, but some of it will be not as pleasant as we would like it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I am. Sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
I feel like in many ways I am exactly what Sir Lovelace is saying. I am a creation of here. I don't fit or look, or I'm from nowhere else. I am here. And one of the things that for me causes me to examine that part of myself is that I know that there are many people like me who feel as though they can't claim parts of themselves. They don't understand how they fit into the narrative. And in many ways, they try to recreate a completely new narrative without understanding the narrative that they came from. I do believe that we have to tell our own narrative, but we also, it has been an observation of mine and my generation many times tries to create a new narrative in the absence of understanding where they've come from at all. And that's a very dangerous thing because it's kind of, reinventing the wheel at every single step. And there's so many things we can take from our past. And so for me, that's why I try to remember, but at the same time, not to just simply regurgitate what I find, but to really imbibe it, live it, and put forward an idea of what it is and what it may become.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on both, all the comments have gone so far. And I just want to say how, Kayla, thank you so much for having this intergenerational conversation. I think it's really, really important. I was working on an essay for the last couple of days, which still isn't done, and something I've never done before, because there was this live stream of these people talking about trauma, and it was going to be cut off last night. So I was working on the essay and I had the live stream playing. But what I want to talk about, and it's come up in terms of what everyone has said so far, and also what the president has said in terms of looking to the future, that if we don't engage with what has happened to us, how being African has been dealt with in this world, if we don't acknowledge the trauma that we have all experienced as part of this grand European project that moved people willy-nilly around the world, banned the drum, banned spiritual practices. Here in Canada, the issues of anti-Black racism, of course, worldwide, but also anti-Indigenous. And so many of the issues are similar, where they couldn't speak their languages and so on. And I think that that's one of the unacknowledged wounds in our culture. And that until we sit and to go to what the president said, I think I wrote many years ago when I was leaving law to write poetry, that it is the poets, the griots, the storytellers, the dancers. We are the new healers, so to speak. Yes, we need the lawyers, the doctors, the engineers. Those are really crucial as well. But in terms of healing the soul, I think that we have to look at this, and that no amount of money thrown at the problem, there's no amount of money that can compensate us for what's happened to us. I think we have to start from that. There's no amount of money that can ever compensate for losing your culture, losing your motherland, losing your language. So we start from that. But as Earl has said, it has had these structural repercussions, and so we have to deal with that. But I also think the heart, the soul has to be healed as well. And that's how I see what I do. It's speaking to that. And that is both to respond to what Mr. Prasad said, which I think is really important. But that is, I don't see the past, present, and future as separate. I think they all exist at the same time. Like Zong, which is the book about these people thrown overboard, that was 240 years ago today. It is still happening in the Mediterranean today. Mm-hmm. That's past, it's also present. And it will be future unless we change it. But we can't change it unless we acknowledge it. So that's, for now, that's how I see. As you see from my hands, I get very passionate, and I hope I don't start crying at some point, because it always brings me to tears.
Yeah. Right.
In terms of acknowledgement, for me, when I saw this question about exploring African in your work, one thing that came to me is that I take erasure very personally. So when I write the stories, I explore personal stories in my work. I explore the stories of my ancestors, of my family, of my community, which is primarily African. And I take erasure personally because I am here and I have a story. And for a long time, they've tried to erase us. Just as what has been said by the other panelists, They've tried to make everybody else has a history but you people, that's erasure. And I take that personally. So with me writing the stories I do write, it is me saying I'm not going to accept erasure.
I
just
like
want
that.
to
Go ahead, sorry.
pick up really quickly on what Zara said. I don't know about anybody else, but I, for one, I'm so tired of hearing the same stories as well. I'm tired of it. Like, I am sick and tired. I turned on Netflix the other night and they're retelling the story of Troy again, some whole series. I don't want to hear that anymore. I'm so tired. How many times are you going to tell the story of Snow White? How many times are we going to go to the movies and see Spider-Man, another Spider-Man? You know? And I think, again, for me, a part of what I do, which I think is important and many people scoff at, is that we have to make the culture cool. It's a very big part of it, right? Because the young people are looking to the mass media to say, oh, this is cool or that's cool. And the artists are the ones who do it. And this way, in my line of things. And we have to make that cool. We have to make them want to know about their ancestors and want to know. So not just putting it across like, you have to know what this is, but you want to know what this is, don't you? I am tired of the same story over and over and over again. And for me, that's one of the reasons why at every turn I'll interject.
But I think that part of our heroism is in keeping alive Africa. And yet when we look at it, when we come to talk about it, we're comparing it with Europe and we're comparing it in terms of our education. Our education has been about erasure. Our education has been about minimizing and belittling. That has been our education. And so the people who have stood up against it and they look insignificant and they look small because they have been small in terms of the society's presentation of them. They are not the scholars and so on. We have lost, I think, more in terms of scholars than in terms of anybody else. Because the scholars have to agree with the values that they were being indoctrinated into. We have a very serious questions, and we have to address them. We have to go into them. Right. At some point, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say at some point I was going to read something here because I saw that as part of your.
I not only encourage you, I thank you, I implore you, please do. Go ahead.
All right. And this is really what we've been saying. This is from Salt, right? Watch the landscape, and it's speaking to the whole business of what you call it. Well, I forget what word I'm looking for, right? Watch the landscape of this island. He began with the self-assured conviction that my mother couldn't stand in him. And you know that they could never hold people here surrendered to unfreedom. The sky, the sea, every green leaf and tangle of vines sing freedom. Birds frisk and flitter and whistle and sing. Just so a yardcock will draw up his chest and crow. Things have their own mind. The rain decides when it's going to fall. Sometimes in the middle of the day, the sky clear, you hear a rushing, swooping song and it fall down. And whoops, it fall down. Other times it's set up whole day. And when you're sure that now, yes, it's going to fall, it just clear away. It had no brooding, inscrutable wilderness here. There was no wild and passionate uproar to make people feel there's beasts, to stir this great evil wickedness in their blood, to make them want to go out and murder people. Maybe that madness sees Columbus and the first set of conquerors when they land here and wanted the Carib people to believe that they were gods. But afterwards, after they settle in the island and decide that yes, it's here we're going to live now, they discover how hard it was to be gods. The heat, the diseases, right? I will read it other part and another little interval because, right? But this is saying from the presenting the idea from the very start we never accepted this idea of unfreedom. And this is our journey. And to bring freedom not only to people who have been shackled, obviously, but to the society. This society is a society have been going on in the same kinds of ways for a long time without changing anything, without questioning anything, without criticizing anybody who they erect as important, So to criticize somebody is like a sin, when the fact is the only way you could go ahead is if the generation come and criticizes the generation that passing on to them. They must.
And I think the work assembled on this panel sparks those questions. And I know for me, reading first Dragon Can't Dance and coming out of academia, because we mentioned it, but reading Dragon Can't Dance and going, the theories you have to explain what this book does can't come anywhere near to explaining what this book does. You have to come up with a new framework. And it's very, very hard, but the material is there, and that's what we push for, and it's that symbiosis. You unearth that presence in your text, and we try to analyze that presence in our work. And I thank you for that. And the idea of that the fecundity in Trinidad, that madness, that green landscape, that freedom that is all around us. And so we could never accept we can't accept, as you say, unfreeness, because it's all around us. This freedom is all around us. You can't control the sky. You can't control the vegetation. You cannot control the earth. And it's a memory that we had. It's a memory we share, Nobe. So when you talk about the indigenous, that's a memory we share with the indigenous. We are not in dominion over the planet. We are in a symbiotic relation with the planet. And that's one of the important things I want to say in really focusing on including that African presence of mind in literary works. Yeah, I'm really enjoying. I hope you're all enjoying this. I have to stop and say I'm really enjoying this so far. This is the kind of conversations I can have every day, all day. But let me move it on to the next question. And feel free, if you do have works that you came with that you're willing to share, feel free, because I think it really lends itself to this question: how do you incorporate African heritage in your work? Whether it is language, rhythm, even worldview, that a lot of us, it's not overt, but it's a different way of seeing the world. How do you incorporate that African heritage in your work?
Well, I think following on what Earl has just done, maybe I'll read something from my first book of poetry. I was still practicing law when I wrote this. And it's all that remains of Kush returns to the desert. And Kush was an ancient African kingdom. When I return, would you remember me, orphaned child, face set against you, tied to me through a suffering, secret and somber? Return I will, grown woad-skinned with grief, for those 1,000 nights that shall be as one. Stranger shadowed in stranded struggles of what was to be, to speak in different tongues of ignorance, forget scattered words, shattering trees of truth on shoals of silence. Could I recognize the earth, black I stand upon, when those of me and mine stood, brazen, been in bronze with pride, dusked with swallowed fear for theirs and their kind? Did one bird sing the silence of my name, then or now, while boats of battered death ride at anchor? Did one bird sing in the tree, bride-bloodied, where we took his life and hers, you mine and I yours, though you didn't know? Will I remember what I cannot forget, that we couldn't tell what we didn't tell, that we would return in the eye of the hurricane? Would you recognize me, theirs, unwillingly, yet yours, in the latitude of my pain, the scars of survival, rights that crisscross the soul in flight? Could you recognize us dyed, hued in skins, force lightened, carrying carved masks of profile pain, Picassoed, yet faithfully, lovingly yours? You said goodbye in all your different tongues, none of mine yet.
It's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. We're here with you. We're here with you, Mama.
You said goodbye in all your different tongues, none of mine, yet all belong to me. Lost child of the wind that mated with thunder under stars that went astray. You were silence. Where were your talking drums to message my soul? Before they twisted it, before they broke it, before they sold it for 12 cowrie shells, before we learned too much, too soon, too late. Nyame, when I return roughshod, take me, one of your many daughters, carrying lost tribes of suffering. Welcome me. Gently, I carry thorns of Africa within, and all that remains of Kush returns to the desert. Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it brings back what you were saying earlier about needing to deal with our trauma. And that is one of the ongoing, the trauma of separation, before we get into the colonial injuries that we suffered once we were separated. And that idea of recognition is so important. And now, in the decade of African people in the diaspora, as UN declared it, that recognition is coming home. And what that poem speaks to so strongly, we're starting to see in our brothers and sisters, across the divide, on the continent, all throughout the diaspora, we're starting to see that recognition. That's a powerful piece. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I shouldn't, yeah. I don't, yeah.
No, but tears are important. Tears are supposed to come. That is our release as well. So, thank you. Virtual
as you be in your fullness, you give us permission to be that way as well. We don't need to hold anything back. So if that's the starting point with you, then we could go. If we need to go now, we could go. We could go. I have something I'll share as well.
Just before you start, I just want to throw it out to the audience. Sorry, being a bad hostess. Throw it out to the audience. Please feel free. Send us your questions, whatever questions you have as we go along, and we will get to them in the question and answer section. Sorry, go ahead, Mohammed.
That's okay. One of the things, a while ago, I was asked to create backstories to imagine backstories for Carnival characters. And one of the characters that I imagined a backstory for was the Dame Lorraine. So I did the Dame Lorraine, the Blue Devil, the Bat, and the Moko Jambi. And so I like to kind of reimagine the stories we tell ourselves. A lot of times we talk about Carnival simply as this mimicry, and we all know that that's not correct, right? It's not. It was far more than that. And so there were many instances, I think, that led to the creation of certain characters. And for me, this was one of those. It's called Pretty Woman. Your bed is as soft as I dreamed, pretty woman. Cleaner than clouds, but soft as the black mud pressed in between my fingers in the field pretty woman. I am the vessel that holds your pride and the secret that carries your shame. I am nameless, but that you call me many things. Cook, whore. I draw your bath water and run errands and put my breasts to the lips of those you gave birth to, pretty woman. What do you think they dream of with their bellies warm and full? It's not so pretty, woman, baby, mother of my woes. You try to look like me because of the way he looks at me. Exaggerate my hips with wire and lace my busts with cotton puff, and you pout to map the fullness of my face, pretty woman. Your bed is as soft as I dreamed. I made it. You lie on it. I lie on it. We lie in it. We lie in it. I take care of your sons who will own my sons and your daughters who will seek them out in heated summers to lie with and then lie on and then lie about and have them ripped for lying, pretty woman. My whole life is a dance. On cool evenings in ballrooms filled with eyes searching a fantasy, my womb is a factory. You want to be me, but you don't want to be me. I'm too fat to be a skeleton in your closet. We do this dance face to face, pretty woman. And when your back is turned, lust levels all things, pretty woman. Black angels moan so the devil finds his wings, pretty woman. Sometimes I feel like the mistress of this house, a pretty woman. Did I tell you? Your bed is as soft as I dreamed. Cleaner than a cloud of cotton, but soft and black. Soft as the black mud between my fingers in the fields. And I'll mock you all I want, because only I know how this feels.
Right.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Right.
I
So
also, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to say quickly, so I feel like sometimes one of the things that we get the privilege to do as artists, because we're able to, and we're really the only people who do it, we're able to consider moments that have happened, not as historical fact necessarily, but as in, like, we are the only ones who remember the emotion of what occurred, which is important for the healing as well, as you know, as we know, and we're able to go back, dredge those things up and make them as real and present day as they were then, you know, and that's important to me as well.
Right. Right.
I think we're all on the same wavelength, because the poem that, one of the poems that I had to share also deals with healing. So Kala, I can share now as well.
Go ahead.
All right. This piece is called Self-Care in the Afterlife. When your money long, you can do things, make yourself comfortable. But if it's short, buy your time, heal in heaven after. Till then you bathe in red lavender and blue soap, light white candles on mornings, pray cloaked in the faint smoke of protection and rosa. Prayers, deep down in the prayers, pay bills through Jesus' name, bond and buy. Tomorrow, please the Lord. Your nails did and hairdo, deep condition once a month. Hire purchase and susu your way to the edge of luxury. Keep a slave band in savings for each child. Create. You create space. Create. You create home. You create and wait for heaven's gate to open.
Thank you. Lovely.
Thank you. So, I'm really, thank you for sharing, all of you. I don't know if you want to read your second piece now, Loveless, or if you do?
But yes, because this would lead us into where we're going, or where I think I am going.
Okay.
And I'm trying to cut it in, but it's difficult. But these fellows here, there was no natural subservience here. Nobody didn't bow down to nobody just so. To get a man to follow your instructions, you had to pen him and beat him and cut off his ears and his foot when he ran away. Your had was to take away his woman from him and his child, and still that fella stand up and oppose you. But these fellas here, these fellas was the most lawless and rebellious of the fellas they had in the Caribbean. The majority of them dangerous rebels exiled here from other islands, men that had no cure, fellas whose sport was to bust one another head, fellas who make up their mind to dead, who land on the wharf from Martinique and Grenada and St. Lucia and from wherever they bring them singing, Mama, mama, your son in the grave already, your son in the grave already, take a towel and band your belly, singing, 1,000, 10,000 to buy me one, me one, me one. And when I dead, bury my clothes. I don't want no sweet man to wear my clothes. And it wasn't just men alone. It had women that was even more terrible. They had to ban them from talking. They had to ban them from walking and from raising their dress tails and shaking their melodious backsides. It wasn't easy. They hold them down and turn them over and do them whatever wickedness they could manage, but they couldn't break them. And then it dawned on them that you can't defeat people. Then they find out that people too stupid to be defeated. They're too hard. They don't learn what you try to teach them. Bam, 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 bam. 400 years it take them to find out that you can't keep people in captivity. 400 years, and it didn't happen just so. People had to revolt. People had to poison people. Port of Spain had to burn down. A hurricane had to hit the island. Haiti had to defeat Napoleon. People had to run away up the mountains. People had to fight. And then they agree, yes, we can't hold people in captivity here. But now they had another problem. And this is our problem. It was not how to keep people in captivity. It was how to set people at liberty. And this is where I think reparation and a whole number of questions and another kind of treatment and view of Black people come in. Okay.
Ashley. And panelists also feel free, we have a conversation, so go back and forth.
I think that's where my generation, we could really locate ourselves, right? Because those who came before us would have seen independence come in and may have had some sort of an appreciation for what was before that. They may have been closer to it. We came with the world coming at us, right? Trying to redefine us at every single turn. Who are we? What are we? What does it mean to be Trinidadian? What are we holding on to? What are we letting go in this moment? And I think what Baba Earl just said in terms of how do you set people free, right? Or how do people set themselves free, really, right? Because it always occurs in my mind, the colonizers had us here basically like a cash cow for however long. And then one day they woke up and they said, oh, go ahead, be free, independence, all that. Go ahead, just take everything. We don't want anything at all, go ahead. And it's a crazy, silly proposition for us to believe that that's true. So how is it that we really truly free ourselves? Because if we were truly free, they would have never gone to that point because they know what comes next after that.
Right. And I think that you should continue along that point because I think it is a very important point you're making there, that how do we free ourselves now? We set free from work perhaps and put on the roadside, but what do we do now?
Yeah. I think we I think we stop. Well, one of the things that we have to do, and I was in a discussion last week about this, and you said it earlier as well, Baba Earl, and about being revolutionary in a Eurocentric framework, right? So you fed all of these things, So like we see that a lot in the Muslim community where people leave Christianity and they consider it a revolutionary act to come into Islam, but they come into Islam with the same Christian thinking and the same judgment and all of these different things. So they create this other version of things. And I think the real question for our generation is not to simply recreate the way we live or the way we exist or the way we understand certain things, but the entire framework in which we understand these things at all, Because I might read a poem that I think in a way sets my mind on a different path. But if I am still operating within a European or colonial framework while I am on that different path, I'm still on that path in that world and still not anywhere.
Yeah, if I can say something to this, this may sound somewhat odd given what we're celebrating today, which is emancipation, and it goes to the points that both Mohammed and Earl are making. Emancipation, I've always thought that when we celebrate emancipation, what are we actually celebrating? Because as Earl has said so clearly, and as we all know, the enslaved never always understood that you could not make of a human being a thing.
Right.
We always knew that. That's why people ran, they got killed, they killed their children. They always understood that. There's another idea of freedom, yes? Outside of, as you say, this European way of freedom. So in fact, if we break it down and parse it, we're actually celebrating the European catching up with what we always knew. Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
We are, now, this is not to say we shouldn't celebrate it, but I think we have to unpack it because we really are celebrating their understanding of what emancipation is, which is that you can't make of a human being a thing, which is something we always knew, which is what Earl just read from his work there. People refuse to be subjugated. So I think for me, that's always been something that is always niggling there at the back of my mind. And the other thing I just wanted to comment, one of the things I hope, when this movement for reparations gains ground is part of this idea of spiritual reparations. Because again, we can't just locate it in the transactional, the commercial, because what was stolen from us has to do with our languages, our cultures, even accepting African spirituality, which is all of us know here today, is still seen as that's some kind of devil thing, by some people. I don't want to mess with that, and many of us try in different ways to meet it and to engage with it. But we're also aware that there's always something there, and that's come from that European culture, that this is not good, there's something linked to the devil. Issue, which I've been doing a lot of reading about. Issue is often associated with Satan. It's total incorrect. It's all about possibility. To talk about African retentions, every New Year's night, my mother would walk to the crossroads, Earthick Road and Archer Street. She'd make the rice and peas, and then she'd walk down to the crossroads and walk back, because the new year, it's the cross, it's the location of potentiality and possibility. And as a writer, what I grieve sometimes is because we aren't taught these things, you have to go looking for them, that many of these resources, like, we don't even have access to them for our work, I think of a artists like Basquiat. Basquiat drew on a lot of the African symbols from Vives and those kinds of things, but it's such a rich aesthetic resource that even apart from if you want to practice voodoo or obeah or any of those, practices, it's there for us that I would urge us to sort of look at some of those things, because it can enrich our lives.
Right. I think, excuse me, a thought just suddenly struck me that we are celebrating Emancipation Day when a number of our lively icons have just passed, and that we should perhaps use this day to remember. I'm thinking Leroy.
I just thought of him, yeah.
I'm thinking, help me on
Better resistance.
I had two good friends, Bass Superior, Bass Superior's brother, is a very good friend of mine, very good person and Calypsonian and so on. He passed as well. And then I just heard Easy Boy, who people wouldn't know. I know him very well, but if you're from Sandy Grande, they will know who we're talking about. Right? And Tony Hall, of course. People who passed recently.
Singing Sandra.
Sprung along, singing Sandra.
Singing Sandra,
Winston Devine.
Winston Devine, yeah.
That Singing Sandra?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
a
she
little while
died
ago.
a
Yeah,
little while ago. And I know the Emancipation Committee, they have been having these commemorations throughout their week of activities. They did one for Singing Sandra, they did one for Butter Resistance.
Oh,
And we are in a, one of the reasons I think we celebrate Nobesi, not just, well, it has evolved. And I don't think even when it started in 85, it was simply marking the day of emancipation.
Yeah.
Because as we know, the very first celebration was Freedom Day. It was 3 nights, it was Carnival, and then Carnival got moved to Carnival.
Yeah.
And so in 1985, we have more of a, and that embracing, and it's grown into that really, that embracing of our Africanness and it is a right now every year to call up this ancestral linkage and to flaunt it. Some years it waxes, some years it wanes, depending on politics. That's all I'm going to say. Sometimes it's swell very large, depending on what's going on in the society. But I think what I envision for emancipation is not just commemorating that day, because we know we have resources that have been telling us that that's not what happened. That version of emancipation that some benevolent man sitting in British Parliament said, you know what, they should be free. That never happened. There was a revolution in the Caribbean every 2 to 5 years, a major revolution in the Caribbean every 2 to 5 years. A lot of them weren't as successful as Haiti, but every island was kicking up. And they could not afford it. They couldn't afford to keep us. They can never afford to keep anyone in states of unfreedom, right? And so that passage that Earl read is so important to keep reminding ourselves of, you know. And then your poem too, one of the things I'm connecting with it that we do not talk about is that they didn't bring unskilled labor here. Why do you think it's called the Gold Coast? Why do you think they went to the Gold Coast? Because they didn't know how to mine for gold. They didn't know how to grow cotton. They didn't know how to grow rice. They didn't know how to grow sugar. They didn't know how to do anything. They needed
skilled
our
labor.
expertise. And that completely eradicates from the outset for me that, as we were talking about, that European, that colonial mentality. That rips it apart, because the lie they've been telling people is that Black people came across here and they were civilized. No, partner, we were civilized from before. We were civilized before you knew what civilization was. The Greeks went to Egypt to learn civilization. So we works like these are the starting points for these kind of conversations, for starting points to get, at least hopefully get people curious, to start looking at that. You see, going back to the first question, what was your aha moment? And then leading into the last question, why is it important to celebrate African heritage in your work? Is that we might lead to someone's aha moment. And I think that's a powerful thing to think about, but I do not want to taint your answers to the last question. Why is it important to celebrate African heritage in your work? You know, because there are people who might recognize it, they might know it, but they don't necessarily bring it to the front. And it's really nice to hear when people do. So I'll throw out that question. I know we lost Babel Earl, but hopefully we will get him back.
And Zara hasn't said. I'm interested to know what Zara thinks about this.
Yeah.
I think for me, in terms of our understanding of celebrating emancipation and celebrating things that we already knew were true, that's a very good point. But I think why things get a little, perhaps lose some context of our understanding of ourselves is because we do have to think about the acknowledgement and acknowledge that for 400 years, in as much as we would have passed down traditions, we've also passed down trauma, right? So these are, it's kind of like, what do you call it, syndrome, when you are kidnapped and you have to side with your kidnapper?
Stockholm.
Yeah, Stockholm Syndrome. So it's almost like we're celebrating emancipation with Stockholm Syndrome. And it's something that, you know, until we do acknowledge that there is trauma in the whole context of it, and it is something that we do pass down as well. So we may pass down the drumming, or you may pass down a song, you know, every New Year's we have certain traditions that we carry on, but at the same time, you know, we have a dichotomy there where we are also passing down trauma, and it's something that we have to deal with for sure in order for us to actually bring it back full circle to its roots.
I mean, that's one of the things that I was hearing a lot. As I said, the stream I was listening to, what all the experts in this area seem to be saying is that unless you deal with the trauma, it gets passed on. Once you deal with it, then the chances of it passing on are virtually nil. And I think that's still a job that we are engaged in. And I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't intending to say that the emancipation shouldn't be celebrated, but I just like to go deeper so that we understand what it is we're doing. And as Muhammad was talking, I was thinking about freedom in conversation with a young man recently, and I texted him that freedom to me is bracketed by two prepositions: freedom from and freedom to. Because freedom doesn't exist really just, I mean, apart from the trees and nature, but we as humans, what is it we're freeing ourselves from, or what are we free from? And what are we actually free to do? Because we know that we can't, as human beings, that we can't do any and everything. I can't come to your house and take your books or that sort of thing. So I mean, so how are we going to construct that too? What is it we're freeing ourselves towards, so to speak? And he added that there were two slashes at the beginning and at the end. And so we're still continuing that particular conversation, you know, but because sometimes freedom comes with a heavy price, is responsibility, you know. Always, yeah.
And we also have to understand that there were some people who, when you talk about freedom too, they wanted the freedom to oppress.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, so you know, it is the work that has to be done is unsurmountable. You know, so that's the other thing we have to think about.
Yeah.
Definitely the definitions for the future.
We will surmount it though.
Just I'm noticing one comment that came to me.
Connection is unstable. All right.
And they're talking about freedom in a pandemic, but freedom isn't physical. As much as we're talking about emancipation, the freedom that we need now is not physical freedom. You know, it's a spiritual or a mental freedom that we're still struggling with.
It's also very much an economic freedom.
Very much.
And it's something that isn't, in my opinion, discussed very much at all, because it seems as though we have some sort of a shame towards wealth. But until many of us who think differently begin to become wealthy, we're going to continue in these circles. And it's one of my main things when I talk about when people come into the communities with programs. At this point, I almost don't want to hear any conversation that isn't an economic conversation in the community. We don't need handouts, we don't need Pampers, we don't need groceries when you might come. We need actual sustainable ways of these communities making money, you know, and we don't like those conversations because I think a lot of times it sounds like you're flying up in God's face, like somebody's come to give you a handout and you're like, no, I don't want that. I want to sustain myself. But the handout culture hasn't been working. And that's just as an aside, you know, I'm very, very vehement about that. Make no mistake. That is,
Uh-huh. All
As
right.
Zara and Nobesi was saying, that is actually part of the trauma that we do not address.
Yeah.
Right. That is
The relationship to money.
that yes, it's a very complicated relationship. But this idea of the handout, we do work in our community around education and empowerment. But the empowerment they want is a bill in their pocket, not how they can continually put a bill in their pocket.
Well,
And
you see,
we run up against that.
I agree with you on one end, but on the other end, I think that we've been unable to show young people continuous success. We've been fed a certain type of story: go to work, go to school, get a job, blah 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 blah, right? And they keep seeing failure with that over and over, and so they make their own parallel economies. They make their own way of doing things, and they do not want to hear what we have to say, because in their parallel economy, they're risking their lives, right? Their life is what they put on the line in order to make it, but they make far more. They have far more autonomy, and the rules are their own. So while we may see it as a dark world that they've created, it's their world, you understand? I would even go so far as to say our world, because I'm in the middle of it, right? And I don't think it's that people don't want it, but how do you match the pride I have when I do my own thing? How do you match that pride? How do I not have to still bow and scrape? Because still many of the economic routes out of it are still at the beck and call of the wealthy. For all intents and purposes, the white.
And I think it has to do with our,
I think
yeah, I think we'll
I
find
think
it.
Earl wants to say something.
Right. What are we about? I think that we've been talking about Europe and this and that. You know, we talk about other people and so on. But we have to also look at ourselves. We have to decide, what are we doing? And what is our place doing? And what are we encouraging them or prodding them to do, or making sure that they do? We can't, I mean, it's quite a complex thing. You know, it's not either or, actually, it's both, actually. We have to increasingly find a way to take both sides together, you know, and see where we go. And I think that one of the things that we do is we want a kind of perfection in people, in the other. Right? We want a certain perfection, whoever that other happens to be. And I think that we have to be prepared to accept that people are trying. Sometimes this is the best. And we can therefore seek to encourage people to do better, but from the position that they are trying. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
Yes.
But we can't really just deal with imperfections all the time. We have to deal with, this is the best this generation could do, or this person could do, or these politicians can do, and take them from that position. Other than that, it will be revolution and rebellion, which is not the exact way I think that we have arrived at it. You know?
I think more than anything else, it will be uncalculated revolution and rebellion at this point. So to even call it that at this point might not, you know, yeah. And we, it's
I didn't give the time for that. I mean, you know, the 70s and that whole period with Cuba, and, you know, that there was this sense of rebellion and revolution. I think I don't know what has happened really, and we have to look at it more closely to find out what has happened to take the idea of revolution and rebellion exactly out of the equation. What is it now? How do we deal with things that we don't like as a community? Or promote things that we like as a community?
Yeah. Oi, we're not in control of the systems that push or promote those things, I think, and that's a large part of it. But yeah.
Right. Well, we're here. I mean, there's certain things we have to acknowledge too, that we are here, we present, we a little more articulate than a generation before, perhaps, you know. But my concern is, what are we doing and what are we asking people to do? You know, and I say so, even as a writer, you find that, you know, you have said this, you have said that, and you said it 1,000 ways and 1,000 times, you know, and nobody seems to be hearing. You know, they hear for 5 minutes and then the rest of the time they forget they had heard this, you know. And we have to find ways of dealing with those questions, right? We can't just, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I think one of the ways of dealing with that, and I'll preface this by saying people call me arty farty and pie in the sky when I say this. But one of the ways of dealing with, as we talk about the trauma that we have, as we talk about how do we prepare the future, it is actually embracing art, literature, music, dancing, poetry, and so on. Because outside the alternatives that we have to the current neo-colonial education that we receive, the alternative societies, this is how they deal with it, right? What we are talking about now, celebrating our heritages, in this specific instance, talking about our African heritage, calling back not just, well, yes, the glory, but also the complexity of it, is a way of leading us into addressing the lingering trauma, the intergenerational trauma that we have suffered. And I think a webinar like this is important for that, for bringing together people who work in this area. And as Nobese said, this is intergenerational, and deliberately so, right? It is a continuous work. Revolution is continuous. And we might wax and wane. I use that term already, and I'm hitting myself for doing that, using a term twice, but anyway, we might wax and wane in terms of our numbers, but I don't think the revolutionary spirit completely extinguishes. I think there might be a time when the environment is not receptive enough. But I think that like the Olympic flame, it might pass from one person to one person, then suddenly burst, flare out, die down, and come back. And one of the things that as I go on that learning is that we can't stop. Even if it's a revolution of one, keep it going.
Yeah.
It does kill you. It will, sooner or later, it might kill you, but to sound pessimistic, but a rich life doing something of purpose, even if you think you're just writing a poem, that is actually doing something of purpose. If that poem can inspire someone else to see the world in a new way.
I want to wrestle with that a little bit, you know, and not to be cantankerous, you know, but I really want to wrestle with that a little bit. I think that we've said that too many times, and we've played into a small place sometimes. I didn't come here for that. Yes, I am here to carry on a legacy but I'm also here to break that possibility, to break the back of that possibility by whatever means I can, to put myself in a place where after I'm gone, that's no longer said. And I just keep asking the universe, how do I do that? How do I be an artist, but at the same time, set an example of how a young Black man within our society can become wealthy and influential in that type of way? How do we change the sound of soca music, which is the popular music, to get the message into that space? How do we change the sound of dancehall music to get the message into that space as well? Not rocking back on my heels at any point in time, you know what I mean? And it's not to say that I'm going to achieve any of those things, but leaning forward into it completely, not resigning myself in any way, shape, or form to die. Like, you know, that it may kill me.
So can I ask you, Muhammad, when you say, like, Is the goal that all young men or young people should be wealthy and influential? Is
No.
that because,
No.
you know, because what concerns me is, you know, I've been listening to what we're saying, and we live in a world now where what? They say what, 10 people control 58% of the wealth of the
All the
world?
money.
What you want?
And they're going to the moon when we haven't solved issues of, you know, food security, refugees.
Yep.
You know, so I'm not advocating necessarily a socialist model, but this idea is what I think to some degree confounds African Americans. The seduction of capital. It's really hard to resist it. And I'm not criticizing anybody, but the idea that you could become fabulously wealthy, you know, I'm not sure that the most wholesome society comes out of that.
And I agree.
And the United States is a perfect example of that. You have now this tribal society with the wonderful ideas of democracy and so on, but you know, people not believing that the election was won, and I don't have to tell you all. You know? So I just want you to kind of parse that out for me. And
I wanted to ask Mohammed about the wealthy business too.
Okay. Yeah. So you're on the spot, Mohammed.
Please, I'm here for it. I'm here.
Explain a little bit more. Tell me more what you think. You know.
This is what's supposed to happen, right? I'm supposed to say these things, and if I'm out of turn, I'm supposed to leave here with a different mindset, right? But what I'm saying is,
we will leave with a different mindset.
Let me hear what you say.
I grew up around, and I'm sure Baba Earl and all of us, I grew up around men with brilliant ideas. All the ideas in the world, beautiful hearts to achieve those ideas. And most of the time, in order to achieve those ideas, because they required money to do it, they had to go to people who didn't care anything about them, lay themselves at the feet of these people and work. And they didn't many times, and I'm speaking from my own experience, they didn't many times work in a way where they became wealthy to be able to pass that on to generations, so who could now have the time and the space to think for themselves and to do for themselves. The money, the wealth in and of itself is not the goal. But okay, for instance, what I'm saying, partly, as an artist, I was never taught how to capitalize on my own creations. So we came into a space and I had a white man approach me, a French native living in Trinidad, not calling anybody name, approached me with basically a slavery contract, right? Who basically wanted to own me for 7 years. And it seemed so lucrative, it seemed so beautiful that had I not had the wisdom, I would have signed myself away. And so many young men and women who are artists, they do that. And what I'm saying is, I feel like the point needs to come where there are enough of us who have the right idea about how that goes. When I go into a community, I just started renovating a property up in St. Augustine. You go into that community, the woman next to me, her house, there's a landslide and the house is falling down. If you don't know someone who can allocate the power or the funds to fix that problem, then you're in a problem and you have to go to someone who doesn't care about you. So for me, it is us collectively creating a space where we no longer have to go to anyone to solve our problems. And I'm not saying for me to personally become wealthy is my goal, but for enough of us to be able to self-determine in this type of way.
Well, right, I think I understand. I would see it like, maybe you should buy a piece of land, or you should ask young people, what do you have in that sense? So what are you working for to buy a piece of land so that you can, this kind of arrangement can take place, you know?
Yes.
And I agree with that, but it's a different thing wanting to be wealthy. You know, wealthy is an ideological position in, you know, as opposed to getting to a in which you can live and which your fellow man can live. And you feel that sometimes, and I understand what you're saying, you feel that it's better you come to me for the loan than to go to somebody else. You know, if it is a loan you want, or it's better that I help you than you go to somebody else. You know, it's better I own this than somebody else own it.
You know? Better we, you know, better we own it. You know?
But I think that we have to be careful of the individualism that could, you know, bring about.
Yeah.
And And maybe we should get the community to let us get rich then.
Mm.
And that's the goal, you know.
As opposed to let me get rich, which is a different kind of thing, you know. I mean,
Absolutely.
You know, yeah, right.
Yeah. So how do you press on that path without oppressing anybody else? You know?
I think that, if I could just interject, part of the reason why we might have problems answering this question about what wealth should look like in a community or individually is because one of the places that artists and writers fill an important position is through pushing people's imaginations, and from the past trauma that we've had, one of the effects of that is that people cannot imagine a world that's different. So you would ask people to imagine a world without money, and they can't do that. The first thing is, well, how would we do? What would be the negotiation? How are we going to get things or do things or live, right? So you can't imagine a world without money. You can't imagine a world without oppression, or you can't imagine a world without having to continuously rebel. So that's one of the places that we fill, and that may be one of the reasons why it's so hard to answer these questions when it comes to money, because it's almost like it is unimaginable.
Yeah. And it is such a difficult, like I said from the very beginning, it's such a difficult and touchy thing to talk about, because often, like myself, even as I'm expressing it, what Baba Earl just said is a far better way to express what I just said, right? So now as I go forward, I understand it's a better way to express what I just said. But there will be risks even to the self in pushing forward in those types of ventures, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think you have to, I understand what you're saying, you know?
I know you do, I know.
That because we haven't, what is the young lady's name again?
Zara.
Zara?
Zara.
Yeah.
Zara. I thought I knew Zara, you know. Zara, you're Gordon?
Yes.
I thought I knew somebody else by the name, that same name. She was Zara.
Well, we've met a couple times, but
All right.
I used to be a journalist. So I am a freelance journalist. So I've spoken to you once or twice.
Right. All right. Well, sorry, you know.
No problem.
I wouldn't forget. No, of course. Yeah.
I just want to say something. This is a slight aside, but relevant. I was reading a work the other day called Cloth, and it's related to this group in Nigeria, the Bunu, B-U-N-U, and the way they work with cloth, weaving it, cloth is circular and so on. And I was really struck. I read it some years ago, but I have to have a photograph made. So I was looking at the book again. And white cloth in particular, they're very, how shall I put it, sensitive to what white cloth means and so on. But there was a section in it in which they talked about the fact that they're very suspicious of people who are extremely wealthy in their group. Now, in that case, because they're more traditional and indigenous, they usually think of it as being linked to witchcraft, right? But I remember I was really taken by it, because there's this idea, again, going to what Zara is saying, that we can't even conceive of a society where people feel that, it's okay if everyone is sort of relatively the same, and that where somebody has a lot of wealth, well, they must have done something, to get that wealth. I just want to throw that into the mix there, because again, these wisdoms are there in our cultures in different places. I think that's, for me, I've been thinking about that a lot,
I want to piggyback off of that now, BC, because I want to tie Mohammed, what you're talking about, and what Baba Lovelace was talking about.
But Mohammed had something he wanted to just say quickly before you.
Yeah, I just think that what you just said, I'm not sure how to refer to you. I don't want to call you no basic, like you're on first name basis. I feel my great grandmother is not to the grave going, who you calling no basic?
You can call me Booyah, which is I have a Booyah. Mbooyah.
I will call you Mbooyah.
Yeah.
Booyah. So I feel like that what you just said, the reason, and what Zara said as well, is that we cannot conceptualize it because, again, it comes out of, and the idea of wealth and how wealth is accrued and how people behave when they're wealthy comes out of that colonial experience, that life experience, and what we've been given.
Yeah.
So we've just seen this, you have to be ruthless, and you have to this, and this, so you do this. Someone said to me the other day, we have entire courses now that teach people how to speak in order to gain access to society and to people and to gain affluence, how to speak to appear to be what they are not.
Yeah.
Public speaking courses that tell you how to speak, not how to be, and I think that's what comes into play there. It's the same framework again that we're looking at it through, like, okay, this is the framework. Not that one of us rises or we work at something and then we rise and we say, right, we are good here, we can be okay. Let's fix the ones right below us, right? And then they pull up, and then there's more of us now, and then they pull up, and then all of a sudden there's 400 of us. You know what I mean? Now they have a problem on their hands.
I think that we need perhaps to present this as a topic because it's an important thing. I remember growing up, my grandmother in Tobago used to make tarts and sweet cakes and so on and sell. Right in the market. I went in the market with her and so on. Then I went up to a big man now with children. I went up to Matura to live. And there was a big set of mango trees in the vicinity. And Walt, my eldest son, said, oh, there's a good opportunity to sell some mangoes. So he decided, he thought about collecting these mangoes and putting them at the roadside and for people to come and buy. And the first person to be against that idea was me. Now, afterwards, I think about it, it was the most stupid suggestion I made about anything. So I understand what Mohammed is saying, that we need to find ways of making money. Now, the word money doesn't have a nice song to it. And perhaps that is what some of us object to, But we need to have a community must have wealth in order to proceed. And we have to encourage people, one, to pursue that wealth. And two, we have also to encourage them to pursue community. You see, maybe it is not just pursuing the wealth as an individual.
It is the community.
But within the framework of a community.
Yeah, and if I might add one thing, because I think we tend to, as a people, beat upon ourselves about, we have to remember that those countries that are wealthy today,
correct,
got it through, it's a kind of witchcraft, right? Like they exploited us,
correct,
that helped to build the foundation of their wealth. It just didn't come like that. So I think we have to, because I do it, we all do it. Why aren't we doing better? We need to get rich and so on. And I think these ideas are wonderful, yeah. Sorry, Kayla, you were going to pull things together.
Well, first, we've gone past the time for question and answers, but we haven't really been getting any questions outside, so that's fine. But we are almost running out of time. And so before I give the vote of thanks, I would like to go around and do one-liners. And right before I do that, to tie all of this up, because we touched on education, we touched on reframing how we see the world. And one of the interesting things when Baba Lovelace was talking is that I kept going, we used to do Lanya, we used to do Lenhan, we used to do all these things that were about community wealth building. And sharing. And the more educated we got, the more westernized we got, the more those things fell away.
Deliberate means to prevent us from doing these things as well. I think we have to factor that in, that our attempts have been, met with not welcome. Although we can't blame. You can't blame somebody against you, can't blame them.
So, what I want to do
That's my last one.
These we've opened up some questions, and I think if nothing else, that has, I think we've achieved something very important today. In terms of both celebrating that very complicated, because it's not simply about putting on a gala and jumping up and going, hey, I'm African now. There are a lot of complexities that come with it. Even when we look at what's going on the continent, what's going on over here, there are a lot of complexities in that celebration. And not that we need to answer the question today anyway, but raising the questions are equally important. And I think this rich conversation that I don't particularly want to end. We have a couple more minutes. So let me do this first. We've started engaging in conversation, but I want to throw it out there. Do any of the panelists have questions for any of the other panelists? Maybe something we haven't covered so far, but you might be interested in poking a little bit. I know we all jumped on Mohammed about wealth and individualism versus communalism. That's a conversation that we needed to have anyway. But is there anything else, that you would like to share, or any other questions you might have for anyone else on the panel before we start to wrap up?
Has this been taped? Is this recorded?
Yes.
Good. Well, maybe you can look at the results of this and have them edited and see what comes out of it as well. That'll be one suggestion I want to make.
I am just really, really keen to know what Mohammed and Zara, like what their experiences are, because, I'm on the way out. And, I am an ancestor in the making. And so I'm really interested in what Mohammed had to say, because those are, we have to start, as early saying, where the people are, is that where young people are, and I know, they want the latest phone, they want this, they want that. What are they going to do to get it? We are bombarded by this transactional type of life and so on. And I think we need to remember, and it's something, in your reading, and Kayla mentioned it, that, people talk about the indigenous. And one of the things I say is that African people are also indigenous, really. We're not from this part of the world. Everybody has been indigenous to some part of the world, some point. We were separated from our indigeneity, but we still maintain a lot of that. And I think if we can begin to return to some of those ideas, the collectivity, the community, and so on, it might strengthen us. And I don't know, what's happening on the ground, but I'm really keen to know what's happening with young people and so on, because I am filled with despair when I read about the situation sometimes in my beloved country. Yeah.
I would, in my final thing as well, I would say to you, Mbuya, do not be filled with despair, because there are so many of us who have our eyes and our hearts very wide open. We have assessed the situation, and we are trying to place ourselves firmly in positions and to attain the knowledge and the wisdom that we need to move the thing forward in a way that is beneficial to everyone, and it does seem like something to despair about sometimes. The media really plays it up.
Yes.
The media really plays it up. But there are so many points of light, even in the middle of all of that madness and that darkness. There's so many points of light, and there's so many young people who are waking up to what the reality is and what they need to get out of,
Okay.
As I move through the different communities, I find so many young men and women who are willing, but don't have the means or even the understanding of how to get the means. And so one of the things we've mainly been working on is, there are people within the society who say that they want to help. Well, show us the pathways to actually becoming independent. Show us those pathways, because that's what we want to show the younger ones. And for me, a lot of times, the reason why I speak this way is the art wakes people up. But it's like Baba Earl said, when we wake them up, what are we telling them to do? I'm awake now in the world. You've shown me what the problem is. You've showed me all these different things. Now, what do I do? You know, look, I can't go back to where I was. You told me that was sleep. You told me that, you know, that's not a good place for me. Do you have a place for me? Can you tell me where to go? You know, and that's where we find ourselves now.
Sorry. Go ahead, love. Go ahead. Dara.
What I would say, piggybacking off of answering the question about our experiences, and also going off of what Mom said about not being filled with despair, is that as much as we can talk about the issues and the problems, yes, I do feel like there is a slight raising of consciousness among young African people, you know? So there's certain things that just are definitely off the table, definitely unacceptable. And there's also certain ways that, you know, people are changing their worldview. For instance, you know, I would wear my hair in an afro, you know, just take it out and wear it in an afro back in 2011. And, you know, there were many times in 2011, people in Trinidad telling me, you don't comb your hair? Or, you know, what kind of hairstyle is this? But I've also seen more people wearing their hair like mine, and over time in that past 10 years, I've gotten more compliments. I've gotten more people saying, you know, I like that. You know, I want to try my hair. I'm going to stop relaxing. I'm going to stop doing this. And that's, you know, one way or one example I can give that comes to mind of people changing their worldview about how they relate to themselves, you know, and their Africanness. So I definitely would say, you know, you don't have to be despaired. Definitely.
Yeah, we got this.
Yeah,
And
Mother
thank
and
you.
we are
And
trying. We are one of
thank
the
you.
many
And
people
thank you
trying.
and Baba Earl for giving us what you all have given us and continue to give us so that we can say these things, you know. Because I remember the first time I read Zong and was completely blown away, but that's a whole other conversation for stuff.
One of the things that I would like to encourage is young community leaders. I don't know how you call that, but I lived in communities a lot. And I was just thinking the other day how my absence was left a hole. And I think that this happened with a lot of people who belong to places and contribute. And I feel that this something should be continued, really. And I think that this is something that we should find whatever way we can to help to the leaders to pursue whatever dream they have, as well as, to help them to do that, because they will discover what they want and and the methods to get it and so on. But I think they need encouragement.
If I could just say one small thing, is there time for one?
Yeah.
You know, we talked about it being a colonial society, and Mohammed, you said something about seeing the house next door where you were working and you have to know somebody to get it done, you know? And I was thinking about my times when I was in Trinidad, you know, in recent years, trying to get my birth certificate, for instance, you know, the new electronic, and the number of people you have to go to. And I remember standing in line one day and thinking, you know, this is such a colonial legacy where Black people's time didn't matter. You could stand in line for 3 hours, get to the desk, as happened with me, and they said, oh, we're closing up today, you know. So what I'm trying to get at is that the civil service continues to be, while the civil services in all the white colonies like here and have been updated, our civil service still seems to be so tied to who you know. And I was told the day, like, come back tomorrow morning and so would help you. But that's because I spoke out. The 3 people behind me had to go away and come back the following day. You know, and so I think even something as basic as our time, Black people's time, does it matter? I think it's really important. And you can see, to get a birth certificate, you had to buy the stamp in the Red House, remember, walk around the block. You couldn't even go through the building. You had to walk around the block to another office. And it's those kinds of things that I think that are for the older generation or the younger people who are moving into it now. We have to make those changes, man, because it's that as well that tells us we're not important. Your time doesn't matter. And time is all we have, really. It's all we have.
Well, thank you very much, Kayla.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
I
you.
have to say a very big thank you. I don't know if those were your one-liners and parting shots, but if you have one-liners and parting shots, please fire away. And then we will wrap up.
My
But
parting
thank
shot would be we jamming still.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good shot.
Yeah.
We jamming, right?
The treasury could fall down. We jamming still.
Jamming still.
Yeah.
Jamming still, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and pretty good.
Yeah. I think just for me, it's such a beautiful thing. I remember the first time I picked up Salt. Salt was one of the first books that let me know that I needed to upgrade my reading level. I started reading Salt and I realized I couldn't get into the book. And I was frustrated. I was very young still. I was too young to be trying to read Salt, but that was just me. I was way too young. I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. But I picked it up and it was a signal to me that there was a world beyond the world I was in. And I wanted to get into that world very badly because there were things being said there that seemed real important to me. I was just rifling through the book and getting bits of it, and and I feel like that has been the role of people like Baba Earl and Muya, where they've kind of dragged us forward. Like, hey, come, we've seen some things, we want you to see more. And I'm glad to be here. I'm honored to be here, actually. I'm very, very honored to be here in this moment. So that's my part in shot. I feel very honored.
Thank you. I echo that sentiment. And I will take the time before I say my general vote of thanks to thank you, Baba Earl, for my dissertation. Because you were one of the books I used for my dissertation. And in a very real sense, without Dragon Can Dance, I wouldn't be Dr. Francis. And that's a debt I hope to repay by doing work and spreading the message and doing work. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you all, because without artists, we would be living an unexamined life. And as Socrates says, there's no life to live. And so officially let me thank my panel for being with me today, for donating their time to have this important discussion. Thank you all who have been watching the live stream on YouTube. Just to announce that on Wednesday, the university will be having another webinar entitled COVID-19 Vaccination, Can It Help with NCDs, Comorbidities, and Long-Haul COVID-19 Symptoms? That would be Wednesday the 4th at 6 p.m. Just to throw in that ad. For further information, you can email Gansha Mohammed at utt.edu.tt. That is GHANSHAM.Mohammed with an O at utt.edu.tt. It's been a pleasure having this kind of conversation around not just emancipation, but the continuing work of emancipation in our daily lives through art and conversation. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I hope we gave you food for thought. I hope we've invigorated a revolutionary spirit in those who are watching. Thank you for your comments. And please join us next Wednesday. for the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.